Who is the best wrestler of the 2010s decade? Sup y'all, welcome back to the review space. In this video, I want to discuss this interesting topic of who is the best professional wrestling superstar of this decade. I know the 2010 still has about a year left. You know, the 2019 year is still happening. We're still like early into it, March 2019. But, next thing you know, 2019 is going to be over, and then the 2010s decade is going to be finished. So it's really right around the corner. This decade is pretty much just about ready to be finished. I mean, it's getting really close to ending. So I was thinking about this the other day, and who is the best professional wrestler of this particular decade? Take a look at the past decades, the 1980s, for example. It's pretty easy to tell, okay, maybe Hulk Hogan was the number one wrestler of the 1980s. Not maybe, he probably would be number one. He was the biggest star, the biggest draw, the most recognizable name, and then you have other names up there, other legends like a Ric Flair, Macho Man, Randy Savage, and those kind of guys, Magnum TA, guys like Andre the Giant. The 1970s, you take a look at Long Reigns, guys like Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales, and those kind of guys, superstar Billy Graham. The Funks, right? And then you take a look at the 1990s decade. You have guys like Bret the Hitman Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Shawn Michaels, Undertaker. Those are some of the best of the 90s decade had to offer. And then, of course, in the 2000s, guys like John Cena, Randy Orton, Brock Lesnar, guys like even somebody like a Dave Bautista who became a big star. You know what I'm saying? So they became main eventers. And of course guys like Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and those kind of work rate, more smaller but technical guys. So there's definitely some big stars that were made in each decade. But this particular decade is interesting because the 2010s, in a lot of ways, there's no clear-cut winner. There's nobody that I can think of immediately at the top of my head that's like the number one guy. When I thought of it, without any doing any research and looking at the longest reigning champion or the most prominent stars of this decade, the 2010s, I mean, just right off the top of my head, when I think immediately of the number one name that I can think of is people like a CM Punk. I mean, I know he held the title for very long, the WWE Championship, but he was a big pushed top superstar in the early part of the decade. During that 2011-2012 period, right before he ended up quitting wrestling and moving on to the UFC and stuff like that. So, Punk is one of those top guys that it could have had potential to become at least a big draw in the company, where he became almost like a modern 2010s version in terms of popularity wise, compared to guys like The Rock and Stone Cold, where the whole arena was chanting his name. The whole crowd, every time that he would come out, everybody was wearing his t-shirts, or a lot of people were wearing his merchandise, and they were into the CM Punk character. So he's definitely a name that you could think of that became a really recognizable, at least in that period of the early 2010s, given the smaller pond of WWE, given the smaller fan base compared to the Attitude Era or even the Ruthless Aggression Era, because ratings kind of dwindled down during it just kept declining and declining year after year after year. The ratings just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller because people just lost interest. The casual fans lost interest. But I feel like around that early 2010s period, when Punk was on top, especially after the pipe bomb with the Summer of Punk in 2011 and his reign in 2012, he might not have been the biggest drawing superstar, but there were certainly some instances where he would outsell John Cena. He would be a top merchandise seller. There would be certain cities that would love CM Punk and reacted to him in a way that he was like the top guy. He was almost like a second coming of he was like Stone Cold Light, or The Rock Light, in terms of crowd reaction. You have the, crowd full of, arena full of people chanting his name and really into the CM Punk character. And even after he left, people would chant CM Punk's name. They would chant his moniker when they were getting either really bored of the current product, and they were, they just want to kind of disrupt the show. CM Punk, CM Punk, and they would just chant that, So it goes to show you that Punk got over. He became a very prominent star in the back of people's minds, and I think that, another part of being a great superstar is that your influence on the newer generation, on the next generation of up-and-coming stars, or people that would become wrestlers in the future. So I think that CM Punk could be one of those. He's definitely going to be one of those guys that 10, 15 years from now, the wrestlers of the future will kind of cite CM Punk as an influence. Say, hey, I used to watch him when I was a kid. Hey, I was influenced by CM Punk when I was a kid. Hey, I wanted to get into wrestling because of CM Punk, that kind of thing. And even now you can see some people, that are like shades of CM Punk. In the indies, you see some people rocking an outfit that's kind of similar to CM Punk, trying to imitate his look or his gimmick. But we're going to take a look at the longest reigning champions of the 2010s, because that's usually, if you're the champion of the company, if you're the world heavyweight champion of your promotion, that means that you are usually the biggest star, whether you're the biggest heel or the biggest babyface that the company wants to promote, that wants to build their promotion around. They want to build a company around and be the top guy. When you're the top guy of the company, you are usually the biggest superstar. You're the most important, if not, one of the most important characters on the roster. So first up, we're going to take a look at the Ring of Honor roster. ROH, I think ROH gets, they don't get as much attention as the other companies, simply because, they've always been an independent company. They've never been that huge mainstream crossover company. They've always been indie, but they, in my opinion, they always had like solid booking. They've always felt like they treated their champions very, very important. They felt protected. They felt solidly booked. They were not, for the most part, not treated like chumps. Their champions are usually protected and booked really, really well and made to feel very important characters on the show. So going back to all the way to early 2010, Tyler Black was one of the earliest champions of the 2010s decade. And Tyler Black would ultimately end up becoming Seth Rollins and become even more successful and become an even bigger name on the WWE. But certainly, I think that ROH wanted to build their title around Tyler Black. You could tell that he was the young guy back then, young guy in his 20s, that was an up-and-coming, good-looking young guy. He had some height on him. He wasn't like a super small guy. He was skinnier back then, for sure. And he was more like a high flyer back then. But certainly, he was gonna be their young superstar with the long hair and the beard, and he had that young pretty boy, good-looking guy kind of appeal to him. On the microphone, he really wasn't that dynamic, and even to this day, he just doesn't have the voice. I always kind of found his voice kind of annoying. That kind of I just don't like his voice. It doesn't sound like an alpha male. He sounds a lot more like he kind of sounds nerdy. That nerdy, annoying, almost like that whiny, high pitched kind of thing with his like a nasally kind of voice, like. I'm Seth Rollins. I just don't like it. But, his in-ring talent is very, I recognize his in-ring abilities. But anyway, he became ROH champion for well over 200 days back in 2010, 210 days. So he reigned for definitely several months, all the way up to September 11, 2010. So between February to September, how many months is that? March, April, May, June, July, August. About 7 months as the Ring of Honor World Champion. So he was definitely the longest reigning champ of the 2010 year for ROH. So he just, I don't think he ever fully realized his full potential in ROH as that huge drawing superstar. I think he was getting there, and they were trying to make him into their top guy, and he ultimately did become the world champion, but he could have been so much more. I think that he could, if he had stayed in the company, he would have done a lot more in Ring of Honor. But he ended up getting that quick call, that rushed phone call from WWE Developmental, like you gotta get to FCW, you gotta be here, So he ended up dropping the title to Roderick Strong, who ultimately became the next world champion. and he carried Roddy Strong. He ended up carrying the ROH title all the way into the 2011 year. And then Eddie Edwards beat him for it. Davey Richards held it for 320 plus days, so that's pretty long. June 2011, Davey Richards held the title. He used to be a member of the American Wolves, one of the better tag teams, more technical tag teams from the early 2010s in ROH. And then he dropped it to Kevin Steen in May 2012. So he held it for about a year, or the better part of a year between 2011 and mid 2012. And so Davey, it's weird because Davey, at one point, I kind of saw Davey as one of the best technical wrestlers in the world. He was almost like a 2010s version of like a Dynamite Kid or a Chris Benoit, that kind of short guy, short height, but like very, very intense performer, very hard hitting with a strong style. I think he called his style American strong style, so he had that Japanese influence, but he's American, so he's got that like hard hitting raw style and very physical, very aggressive. So and Ring of Honor did a great job with Davey. I felt like they really made him look like a superstar, like a convincing main eventer. Unfortunately, Davey never really broke out either in TNA or WWE. I think there was a slight chance that the American Wolves could have gone into developmental in WWE, but they just never did. They never made it to Vince's company, so they ended up going to TNA instead, and they just kind of became a tag team. And Davey, he had some potential. It's just that the guy was so small and so short. And to be fair, I mean, he had some physical charisma, but the guy just wasn't like super captivating on the microphone. He didn't have a dynamic personality. He didn't have incredible mic skills. So a lot of I think those things, adding with his lack of size, the guy was maybe he was maybe like 5'7", 5'8" at best. So he wasn't a very big guy. And so he was lacking that that physical presence. He was lacking that incredibly big guy presence. Kevin Steen, which ultimately would end up becoming Kevin Owens in WWE. I mean, he held the title for 328 days. So Davey and Kevin Steen, they held the title longer than Tyler Black. Kevin Steen also became a pretty big star in ROH. I thought he was a good in-ring performer for a heavier guy, like a fat guy or a guy with a big belly and all that. He was a fat dude, but he was able to become a world champion in ROH because he was so athletic and he had some pretty good mic skills and all that. I never felt super captivated by Kevin Steen. Even in ROH, like as much as I enjoyed his matches, especially against like El Generico and stuff, he never felt like I didn't like his francophone, like French Canadian accent. I just didn't think he was captivating on the mic. I think he's an okay mic worker, and when he's cutting and he's talking and cutting a promo, but he's nowhere near as funny as like The Rock. He's nowhere near as charismatic as Ric Flair. He's nowhere near as intense as Stone Cold Steve Austin. I think he's okay on the mic, but that's about it. He just happens to be a fat guy that can do like somersaults, and he's just a fat dude that happened to be very athletic in the ring, and like he's able to like fly and jump and have some really cool moves. And I think when he went to WWE, they watered his moveset even more, so he's not even that good anymore. So I think Kevin Owens' peak was in Ring of Honor as Kevin Steen, and even being the ROH champion. 328 days, that's very, very long, but he ended up dropping it, I think, to Jay Briscoe in April 2013. And Jay Briscoe's one of these guys that's like a good hand in ROH. I don't think he was ever like the greatest ROH star of all time. He's a reliable, tenured veteran in ROH. He's somebody that they can rely on to have a solid main eventer. But I don't think he was ever like top guy, face of the company kind of guy. Jay Briscoe is good, and he's I think he's a competent performer, and he's got some charisma to him, but I feel like his best work is with his brother, the Briscoe brothers, as a really cool tag team that they have that southern accent and all that. So we got Adam Cole up next, rating 275 days. Adam Cole, I thought he's got a good look, you know, kind of a handsome guy, not like super muscular, but he was almost like a newer version of Tyler Black. He reminded me a lot of you know, like a young Seth Rollins, where he's got the beard, the long hair, kind of a pretty boy look, and you know, good in-ring ability. But I think that on the microphone, Adam Cole is definitely a better, more charismatic guy when he's cutting a promo, you know. And he reigned as the ROH champion for 275 days, which is pretty impressive. If I'm not mistaken, he's also the first three-time ROH world champion. You know, he became two-time champion and three-time champ, and he became a multi-time champion, and he was very dominant, and he was somebody that they could go back to. Ultimately, of course, he ended up going to the WWE later on, but this was back in 2013, and he was just a very young, you know, ROH type guy. Michael Elgin was only champ for 76 days. I never really saw too much charisma with Elgin. I think he was a pretty strong guy, and he was very technical, and they used him more in New Japan as a bruiser type guy. Like, he's, you know, he doesn't have the look, and he doesn't have the charisma. He's kind of a boring, bland guy, but he just happened to be very athletic. Jay Briscoe, he won it again. Jay Lethal. Jay Lethal is, if I'm not mistaken, the most dominant ROH champion of the 2010s. And I want to talk about Jay Lethal for about a minute here. His reign, his first title reign as Ring of Honor champion, is 427 days. That is insane. That's a very long title reign. He won it back in June 19, 2015 at Best in the World 2015. Over 420 days. That's an incredible long reign. And if I'm not mistaken, he's also the longest reigning Ring of Honor television champion, the TV champ, you know. So he held both championships for very long periods. So Jay Lethal is the most dominant Ring of Honor champion of all time. Oh, maybe not of all time, but of the 2010s, I should say, of the 2010s decade. So he's accomplished so much. It's kind of weird that he's never gone to WWE. He's never like really broke out in other companies. You know, I think he did some pretty good work in TNA, but he was just kept as a, you know, he never really became a top guy in TNA. And I don't know if he'll ever go to AEW. So Jay Lethal he's definitely one of the better Ring of Honor stars that they've ever had. The guy's good on the microphone. He can deliver in the ring. You know what I'm saying? So Jay Lethal is definitely, in some ways, like maybe even a little bit underrated. I don't see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, Jay Lethal's one of the best of all time," or "Jay Lethal's one of the greatest wrestlers ever." You know, he happens to be like one of the longest reigning ROH champions, and he happens to be one of the longest reigning TV champions. So, you know, Jay Lethal is very dominant as a performer. So it's like, I don't know what's missing with Jay Lethal. I think it's just because he was a lot more memorable as the guy that would parody other wrestlers. Like when he had that really funny promo face-off with Ric Flair back in TNA, they had that woo-off. It was so hilarious. But he was imitating Ric Flair. And then when he was imitating, you know, Macho Man Randy Savage's Black Machismo, he had so much charisma. I think just as Jay Lethal, he's a little bit more generic, a little bit more like, oh, he's just an average guy, like on the microphone and all that. But he's good, you know, he's good on the mic, and he's good. He's a good performer. It's just that, and he's reliable. You know, he defended his first reign like 28 times. You know what I mean? So he's a reliable workhorse for Ring of Honor. It's just that, you know, maybe he's not necessarily the first guy that people think of as like the most dominant ROH champion. You know what I mean? And I think he kind of gets underrated in that way. I mean, right now, if I had to choose who is the most dominant ROH champion, it's Jay Lethal. You know, take a look at other guys like Kyle O'Reilly. He only held the title for 33 days, you know, just a little over a month. Chris Daniels held it for 105 days. Cody held it for 175 days. Dalton Castle, 197 days. And then, you know, Jay Lethal now is the current champion at 247 days and counting. He won it back in June 2018, last year, and he's still the champion. So Jay Lethal definitely, he has to be the longest reigning world champion, right? Yeah, he is. He's number one. Yeah, because I was thinking like Samoa Joe is the longest reigning, but it's actually Jay Lethal now combined. Although with Samoa Joe, he still has the longest single reign continuously. He has 645-day championship reign back in the mid 2000s, I guess. But definitely Jay Lethal is the longest reigning world champion combined of all time, which is absolutely insane. And also, I think also the TV champion. So ROH, I guess Jay Lethal would be the top guy. It's just that other guys stand out even more. Guys like, I think of guys like Adam Cole as one of the top ROH stars. He feels like a big deal. Guys like Marty Scurll feel like a big deal. Back in the early 2010s, it was Tyler Black. He felt like a big deal. Even somebody like Austin Aries. Although maybe Austin is a little bit more of a TNA guy by the 2010s. Yeah, those are like when I think of ROH. Who's the top guys in ROH? Jay Lethal, Adam Cole, Tyler Black at the very beginning of the decade, and then like a few guys here. They got guys like a Cody, guys like Chris Daniels, guys like a Briscoe. Every now like certain guys that would pop up that would have some buzz. Even somebody like a Dalton Castle would have some buzz. But like, yeah, sure, definitely Jay Lethal would be the by just by his title reigns alone, I guess he would be the number one Ring of Honor top superstar. So in the 2010s, yeah, the 2010s belong to Jay Lethal in Ring of Honor. All right, now let's move on to TNA. Who is the most dominant, TNA champion of the 2010s? Let's see. I think AJ carried the title well into 2010, right? He was champion from like late 2009 into the early 2010, and he was actually one of the best in-ring performers around that time. I remember he was defending it during that time, like around the time when like Hogan and Bischoff came in like early 2010, and then he ultimately lost it to RVD, Rob Van Dam. RVD held it for a few months, and then Jeff Hardy beat him by October 2010 as the evil Jeff Hardy with short hair, the emo-looking hair. He held it for 91 days. Mr. Anderson beat him in early 2011. Mr. Anderson. Yeah, Anderson never really... I really liked him as Mr. Kennedy in WWE, but he never became... I just felt like there was a lot of potential there that never fully realized. That never fully materialized. I think he cut a great promo. He was very confident and charismatic on the mic. But Mr. Anderson or Mr. Kennedy, he just never fully became the greatest wrestler. I thought he's going to be like the next, I thought he was going to be the 2000s version of The Rock, or the 2000s, this like super charismatic blonde guy, and he'd be cutting like 20-minute promos, and he would be so entertaining, but he just never panned out, after he got released from WWE. And he ticked off Randy Orton and those kind of guys, and then he ended up going to TNA as Mr. Anderson. He cut some good promos in TNA, but he was never like the most important factor in the company. Jeff Hardy became the champion again, only for 11 days. Sting became champion, 108 days. Mr. Anderson again, 29 days. Sting, 27 days. Kurt Angle, 72 days. James Storm, only for about a week. Unfortunately, I remember that back in 2011. That was so annoying, because I was so happy for James Storm. I thought he was such a great character. That cowboy gimmick with the drunken thing, with the drinking beer, and he was cool. He was almost like a mix between like Stone Cold Steve Austin, but even more cowboyish, like I don't know, like the Guns or whatever. You know what I mean? But Bobby Roode ended up beating him actually, and he became one of the longest reigning TNA champions of all time at 256 days. I remember that reign by Bobby Roode. I thought he did some good work. He was a good heel. He was a good bad guy back in the late 2011, early 2012 period. Ultimately, he lost the title to Austin Aries back in early summer of 2012. And Austin held the title for just a little bit less than 100 days, so a few months. Jeff Hardy beat him at October 2012 at Bound for Glory. Jeff Hardy is now in his redemption storyline where he screwed up so much in early 2011. He had that horrible match with Sting, and then he kind of had a good comeback. He became like a really reliable wrestler again, because he got sober and all that. So a pretty cool story. You know, he ended up getting beaten by Bully Ray in March 2013. And Bully Ray, this was when Bully Ray was like at his peak singles, when he was like in shape and he was cutting some really good promos, and he dominated for 130 days as the champion. Chris Sabin beat him and was champion. Oh my God, talk about your forgettable champion. Wow, Chris Sabin was TNA World Champion for about a month in 2013. I forgot about that. Yeah, what the heck was that? That was completely like, ugh. What were they thinking? You know, nothing against Chris Sabin. Like, he's very talented in the ring, but he's an X Division guy, and they never really built him up. And then Bully Ray got the title again for 66 days. He lost to AJ back in October 2013, Bound for Glory. AJ held it for about 9 days, and what happened to the title? It got vacated in late 2013. That's right, and then it went to Magnus. Oh, this was around the time when AJ was about to leave the company. You know, this was when his final months in TNA before going to New Japan. So Magnus becomes champion for 128 days. This was back when Magnus was like being forced as the first ever British world champion, and he was like beating guys like Sting and AJ Styles and all that, but his reign was never that impressive, unfortunately. I think he would become a much better champion in NWA, as the NWA National Wrestling Alliance with Billy Corgan and all that. He'd do a lot better work. Eric Young would be champion for 70. That's right. I remember he became champ for 70 days. That's right, in 2014. Oh my god, yeah, I forgot about that. They tried to imitate Daniel Bryan with the bearded gimmick, and he had the long beard, and he was kind of a smaller guy, and oh my god, man, it was such a hacky thing for them to do, because it's such a cheap ripoff of like Daniel Bryan back in 2014. But then Lashley comes in, the Dominator, boom, defeats Eric Young and becomes a champion for 91 days. I do remember that back in the summer of 2014. That was great. Lashley was a cool champion, and then he lost the title to Bobby Roode. 111 days with Bobby again, so Bobby's the new champion again. Lashley beats him in early 2015. Lashley with another kind of short reign, but he was, Lashley. The cool thing about Lashley was he had size. He looked like an absolute, convincing MMA fighter, because he did win some MMA matches. He was actually a very accomplished amateur wrestler, so he's actually very legitimate, and so he looked like an actual heavyweight, almost like a black version of Brock Lesnar, TNA's version of Lesnar. So I was really digging Bobby Lashley's run in TNA at this point by the mid 2010s. Kurt Angle beat Bobby. He reigned as champion for 145 days, and then EC3 EC3 became champion for 101 days. This was when they were trying to make EC3 as a top guy. He actually kind of became a good main event guy. TNA really protected EC3. They made him look good. They actually created an actual star, EC3, like a guy that was never used in was never used to his full potential in WWE, and just kind of floundered in the undercard, and then ultimately he left or was let go by WWE, and then he went to TNA and became an actual solid character that was, that had some main event potential, and now he's at, ended up going to NXT and all that, and now, on the main roster in WWE, so that's kind of a cool going full circle, and EC3 definitely owes a lot to TNA making him into a solid character. Matt Hardy became champion very briefly. That's right, Bound for Glory. Oh my god, in 2015. Yeah, that like crappy North Carolina event. Like, it just felt so it felt like nobody was watching TNA by that point, And then EC3 became champion again. Matt Hardy became champion for about 67 days, and then Drew Galloway, Drew McIntyre. This was Drew's redemption, when he was let go from WWE, and then he became a TNA guy, kind of floundered in the indies a little bit, but he got in better shape, became more muscular and all that, became, developed his character to be a little bit more of a Scottish, tough character. Became champion about 89 days. So as you can tell, like TNA never really had a lot of long champion reigns. It was just like 100 days here, maybe 60 days here. Nothing really impressive. They never really had that single dominant superstar. I guess the closest would be like Bobby Roode, I guess, with having over 200 days and stuff like that. But they never really had an incredibly long reign. I guess Lashley would be their most dominant looking champion because he kept winning it every now and then. June 2016 became champion again. So there was definitely a couple of years of Lashley being a convincing heavyweight star in TNA. He was a great heel. I really enjoyed him. That's my favorite version of Bobby Lashley, is his run during the TNA 2010s as TNA champion between I think 2014 to 2016, and then Eddie Edwards became champion. Oh, I forgot about that. I forgot about Eddie becoming TNA champion. That felt so forgettable. He was almost like a Chris Sabin type. I think that Eddie was even in ROH. He kind of felt like he's good, but like he's ROH champion. Like I don't know. There's just something missing with Eddie Edwards. He's a good hand. He's a good tag team guy, especially with Davey as the American Wolves. But like he never felt like a super incredible main eventer. There's always something missing with him. I don't know if it's just a lack of size, a lack of charisma, or what, but like the guy is just so plain. Lashley becomes a 4-time champion, 175 days, so Lashley is really he's really rocking by this point, January 2017. Maybe this is his final run. And then Alberto El Patron, the former Alberto Del Rio, became champion by summer of 2017. And then Eli Drake. Oh yeah, I really forgot about Eli Drake, that he became TNA champion in 2017. Summer of 2017, he reigned for 146 days. I completely forgot about him. He's pretty charismatic. I'd like to see Eli Drake get a bigger exposure. He's pretty charismatic dude. Austin Aries became champion in January 2018. Again, this is his second reign for 102 days. And then Pentagon Jr. became champion April 2018, only for a couple of days. And then Austin Aries again reigned for another 173 days. So 2018 looks like was dominated by Austin Aries. And then now the current champion is Johnny Impact, who's been reigning for over 140 days. So out of all those different title holders and Ring of Honor, TNA Impact champions, I gotta go with Lashley. I thought that overall he had the look, he had the gimmick, he was convincing, he was believable, and he reigned for multiple different times. I think he's a 4-time TNA champion, and he was good. I really enjoyed his run. So I gotta go the best TNA, or the biggest TNA superstar of the 2010s. I'd have to go with Bobby Lashley. I thought that he was great. You can make an argument for Bobby Roode. You can make an argument for AJ Styles, certainly. And even somebody like an Austin Aries or Bully Ray, because they did some really phenomenal work, like microphone, promo wise and mic skills wise. Certainly, Bully Ray would be up there. Austin Aries would be up there as really charismatic guys and personalities. But overall, I got to go with Bobby Lashley. He was so dominant as a world champion. Like nobody could mess with him. He was kind of like Brock Lesnar. So my number one would be. It'd have to be Bobby Lashley. So that's the top TNA world champion. But you can make an argument for Bully Ray. You can make an argument for AJ. You can make an argument for Bobby Roode. You can make an argument for Austin Aries for sure. And then we take a look at WWE top stars. Actually, let's go to New Japan first. Actually, let's go to the New Japan IWGP heavyweight champion. Before we get to WWE. So this is the least familiar promotion for me, because I don't really watch too much New Japan stuff. Like every now and then I'll watch a match, I'll go check out a Wrestle Kingdom here and there, but it's very infrequent, very inconsistent. I just don't keep up with New Japan programming. I don't really follow the storylines or anything like that, because it's not as captivating to me. And there's definitely a language barrier there, a culture barrier, but they've had some really solid matches. But and one thing that I do appreciate about New Japan is that the IWGP title feels very prestigious. You know, kind of like the Ring of Honor title. They protect the championship. They make it feel important by giving it to only a few people and having those long reigns of a very like dominant reigns by the guy who becomes a champion. All right, so early in the decade, I think it was Shinsuke is the champion in early 2010, I guess, and then Togi Makabe became champion by May 2010. Satoshi Kojima by October 2010 as the champ. Hiroshi Tanahashi, that's probably the number one guy. I don't think I even have to look at the rest of it. I guess Okada would also be another like top star, but I would probably say Hiroshi Tanahashi is the most dominant New Japan champion that they had, you know, the IWGP World Champion, because he held the title for like 404 days. Over 400 days from 2011, early 2011 to early 2012, as the title holder, which is absolutely crazy, well over a year. And then Okada beat him in February 2012. He held it for 125 days. Goes back to Tanahashi in June 2012, 295 days. Okada again at 391 days. So between Okada and Tanahashi, these are very lengthy title reigns. You know what I mean? And they're very competitive. The reigns are very long. It's interesting. Who is better, Hiroshi or Kazuchika? Okada or Tanahashi? Like, I think just a pure babyface and almost like a boring kind of bland babyface, almost like a boring vanilla babyface, high flyer type. I guess Tanahashi is more, he's more presentable as a basic good guy, but I just don't like his look. He's got that like really crappy like 1980s spiky hair that he has, that kind of outdated looking hair, you know, almost like a mix between like an emo girl's hair and like a 1980s glam rock looking hair. So I'm not a big fan of that. And I don't really, as far as charisma wise, like he's got a look. He certainly has a good look, and you know, kind of a muscular physique, and you know, so he's definitely presentable as a top guy. It's just that he's missing a character. I don't know what his personality is, or like his gimmick. You know, I think he's missing that captivating character. Okada is a little bit more interesting because he can, you know, he's switched between like a heel, kind of an arrogant type of guy with the, you know, the Rainmaker and all that, with his mouthpiece. I think it was Gedo that would cut promos for him, and then he would also kind of switch between that and the, I don't know, people jokingly call it as the broken Okada gimmick, where he's a little bit more like, he's got the long pants and he's got the red hair, so he's a little bit more comedic or kind of funny, like just unpredictable. You know what I mean? And he's cutting promos, and he has a little bit more personality, a little bit more charisma as the broken Okada. Which is kind of funny, you know. And then AJ Styles becomes the champion in May 2014, 163 days. Tanahashi becomes champion in late 2014, 120 days. AJ, again, 144 days in early 15. It goes back to Okada in summer of 15, 280 days. Tetsuya Naito, becomes the new champion in April 2016. Only holds it for 70 days. Goes back to Okada for 720 dominant days. That is insane. That is absolutely nuts. 720 between June 2016 to June 2018. Almost 2 years straight of being the dominant IWGP World Champion. Kenny Omega beats him in June 2018 for becoming the champion for 209 days. Hiroshi Tanahashi becomes champion in early 2019. 38 days, and then of course Jay White as the new champion by February 11, 2019, as the new foreign heel champion. So they definitely invested a lot into Jay White, and they had to really force him, man. He feels really rushed. I wouldn't even rank Jay White as anywhere near the top. It'd probably have to be Okada as the number one guy, but Tanahashi is up there too, so that, you know, it's kind of a weird, odd thing. Like, who is the bigger star, Okada or Tanahashi? It's kind of debatable. Tanahashi, they went back to the well with him a lot more times, and I think he's been a lot more of a presentable, just generic babyface. But Okada, he's got the look, he's got the in-ring ability, and you can see it like shades of charisma with Okada, even a little bit, as the broken Okada with the pants. So the biggest, but it's weird too, because I mean, like in the Western world, I think a lot of people would probably recognize Kenny Omega as the bigger star out of all of them, just because the Western fans would just recognize Omega probably a little bit more than any of the other Japanese talent. You know, like the white fan base of America and you know, the Western countries would look at Kenny Omega as the blonde-haired, you know, white Caucasian guy that was like really dominant in New Japan as well. Like he was that, you know, the Bullet Club member, Bullet Club leader, or whatever. So they kind of see him as a, you know, people tend to gravitate around Kenny Omega a lot. Although I do feel that Kenny Omega is kind of overrated, and you know, he's nothing really amazing aside from the in-ring, you know, long matches of attrition in the strong style. You know, and then you got Okada and Tanahashi that are also like huge stars, but it's at least in terms of New Japan. But like, you know, it's all matches. It's really match heavy. Like as far as character wise, I just feel like they're missing so much in terms of charisma, in terms of mic skills, in terms of investing in a character. You know, they just happen to be like work rate machines. You know, like 5-star, 6-star, 7-star matches, which is like really nerdy because we're talking about like fake wrestling here. Yeah, they just don't have that many like interesting moments. That's like the Attitude Era. You know, I feel like New Japan is like the opposite of the Attitude Era. They're the opposite of like pro wrestling entertainment or sports entertainment. They're a lot more like sports, emulated sports. They're trying to be very sports heavy, trying to make it feel like it's a sport, but like, you know, it's fake wrestling, so it's kind of hard to take it seriously anyway. But I guess overall, I mean, if I had to choose as the number one guy of the 2010s in New Japan, it'd have to be Okada. You know, I went by Tanahashi earlier, but like, just by reign alone, I guess it'd have to be Okada. And he, you know, he had those 7-star matches and all that, and he does have the look. So, you know, I have to go with Okada for the 2010s in New Japan. And overall, I mean, now we get into the WWE with the WWE title. We're gonna have to kind of go through here really quickly. Batista, you know, held it for a little bit in early 2010, you know, February. John Cena by March 2010, you know, WrestleMania and all that. I think he beat Batista back. And then Sheamus becomes the champion for 91 days, so about 3 months. Randy Orton becomes champion. Man, there was definitely that year was bad for the 2010 year. Yeah, just a horrible year for the WWE title because they went through so many different champions that title was passed around so much, and it felt like they just had temporary champions, you know. They could never fully invest in a single guy. Batista, Cena, Sheamus, Randy, and then they went to The Miz, you know. The Miz was the longest reigning champion between 2010 to early 2011, May 2011, and he did, you know, retain it at WrestleMania 2011, and he held it for 160 days, but even 160 days is like not that like amazingly long. You know, it sucks that the WWE just had really, really, really short title reigns. They could never fully go with one guy until, you know, we would ultimately end up with CM Punk. You know, so it went to Cena in 77 days, May 2011 to July 2011. Punk beats him at Money in the Bank 2011, the very infamous match where he's threatening to leave and all that. Holds it for about a month. It goes to Rey Mysterio for less than a day. It goes back to John Cena, you know, 20 days, and then it goes to CM Punk for very briefly. I think it got cashed in by Alberto Del Rio. Holds it for a little over a month, and then it goes back to Cena for 14 days, and then it goes to Alberto again for 40 days between October 2011 to November 2011. And then CM Punk would hold on to it for a whopping 434 days. He was the, you know, a very lengthy champion. Between November 2011 to January 2013, he lost it to The Rock. The Rock holds it for about 70 days. John Cena beats him at Mania 29 in 2013. 130 plus days with Cena. It goes to Daniel Bryan for very briefly. Randy Orton cashes it in. August 2013, holds it for about a month. Daniel Bryan gets it back, but only, I think, for about a day. It gets vacated, presumably by the Authority. If my memory serves me correctly, it goes back to Randy Orton. In October 2013, at Hell in a Cell, he holds it for 161 days, and he loses it to Daniel Bryan, the Yes Movement, by April 2014 at WrestleMania 30. And Daniel Bryan becomes champion for only about 64 days. Now, at this point, we've seen two guys that got big crowd reaction. We got CM Punk and Daniel Bryan. But between those two, I think Daniel Bryan had a more, not necessarily mainstream, but like the whole arena would chant yes, just because it was so catchy. But I never felt like Daniel Bryan was that big of a deal. I always felt like Daniel Bryan was overrated, whereas CM Punk was legitimately a charismatic, and he was good on the mic, and his personality really, people bought into it, and his look with the tattoos and everything. Whereas Daniel Bryan was more like a hipster-looking guy that was kind of like, who is this small guy? So I never fully bought into the Daniel Bryan thing. I thought he was a capable, mid-level guy, but like, as the top guy, I never bought into it. I just thought he was too small, and he wasn't captivating on the microphone. He was such a far cry from guys like The Rock and Stone Cold and Hulk Hogan. Like, this guy was so overhyped and overrated. I never fully bought into it. You know what I mean? Hey, don't get me wrong. He's a good technical performer, but like, man, what a fall from like the top of like the cream of the crop with guys like Randy Savage and Ultimate Warrior and Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, and The Rock and Austin. Like, you have this small guy that basically just has one word catchphrase, yes, 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 and it's so lame. Now, I would rank CM Punk above Daniel Bryan, although I know a lot of people would probably pick Daniel Bryan over CM Punk just because they love that stupid yes movement so much. But I would say that CM Punk so far is the number one WWE star of the 2010s so far. So we go to Cena, 49 days. Brock Lesnar, 224 days. There's another cool thing is that Brock Lesnar became a big star in WWE again when he came back in 2012, and then he started winning world titles and universal titles. He got right back on top. Like, Vince McMahon put him back in that, like, yeah, like this, I'm gonna get my money's worth with this guy. Like, I had big, like, you could tell Vince McMahon had big plans for Brock Lesnar back in the Ruthless Aggression era in 2002, 2003, 2004, but he left for the NFL, trying to, he wanted to be a football player. He wanted an easier schedule, and he kind of ended horribly. He left on a bad terms with WWE, and so he was out for years and years and years, and he finally came back in 2012, and he was welcomed with open arms, and he got an easier schedule, and he became like a super convincing like main eventer. And I think it's largely to do as well with him becoming a UFC champion. He became such a big star in UFC and a big draw that Vince McMahon was like, hey, yeah, of course I'll bring him back. Like, I gotta bring him back. He's very convincing. He is legitimately this alpha male top champion that I can build around. Alright, so Seth Rollins becomes champion by Mania 2015, 220 plus days until he got injured. I'm sizzling. Roman Reigns becomes champion for like less than a day. Sheamus cashes it in at Survivor Series. Becomes champion for about a month. Roman Reigns gets it back for 41 days, loses it to Triple H in early 2016 for 70 days. Triple H is the champion again for the 9th time. Roman Reigns is the champion again at WrestleMania for the 3rd time. Holds on to it for 77 days. Seth Rollins beats him. Seth Rollins, the Money in the Bank thing, June 2016. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Seth Rollins, right, that beat him, and then Dean Ambrose, I think, is the one that cashed it in, if I'm not mistaken. Right, is that right? And he becomes champion, WWE champion for 84 days. And then during Dean Ambrose's reign, which really wasn't impressive at all. A lot less impressive than Seth Rollins, and even not as impressive as Roman Reigns. Dean Ambrose had a horrible run, unfortunately, as the champion. This was the point where the WWE title switched to SmackDown when they had the brand split in mid 2016. And then AJ becomes champion September 11, 2016 at Backlash, 140 days. Cena beats him at Royal Rumble. Holds on to it for a couple of weeks. Bray Wyatt beats everybody at Elimination Chamber. Becomes champion all the way to WrestleMania for about 49 days, 50 days. Randy Orton becomes champion. 49 days at WrestleMania 33. Jinder Mahal beats him. Becomes the most dominant champion of 2017 at 170 days. But AJ beats Jinder in England in November 2017 and becomes champion for well over a year. Who knew that AJ Styles would be the most dominant WWE champion in the later half of the 2010s? That's incredible, absolutely incredible. AJ reigning for 371 days and loses the belt to Daniel Bryan, the new Daniel Bryan, the environmentalist heel, evil bad guy, at November 13, 2018. And now he's been champion for 111 days on his 4th reign as WWE champion. So it's definitely been a very interesting and very mixed crop of people in the WWE title picture. CM Punk obviously had the longest single reign. So, but the problem is that he left so early in the decade. He was gone by early 2014. So he basically missed the rest of the decade. Like, another 5 years or almost 6 years of the 2010s. He was out of WWE. So how could you say that he was like the number one guy or the best wrestler of the 2010s when he was gone by early 2014? That's kind of sad. AJ combined he actually held the title longer than CM Punk overall, even though CM Punk had the longer reign. AJ currently has 511 days combined, becoming champion twice, and then CM Punk became a 2-time WWE champion for 462 days. So AJ actually has him beat by quite a lot. So AJ is one of the longest reigning WWE champions. He's not in the top 10. There's a lot of guys that's actually ahead of him, but AJ's definitely up there. I mean, he's definitely had some solid runs, a couple of solid runs as the champion. That's another problem too with AJ, is that he was never the number one guy, even as the champion. He always felt like a secondary champion, because when the WWE title moved on to the SmackDown brand, he was never a Raw guy. He was never a Raw, the number one brand, the A show. He was never an A show champion. He was always the B show champion and the SmackDown guy. So he even though he was WWE the top guy in SmackDown, he's always second rate, compared to whoever is number one on Raw. I would even say he took a backseat to guys like Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns is on, he's always on Raw. He was the top guy on Raw. So, you know what I'm saying? Hold on. Okay, so unfortunately for AJ, he's not. I don't look at him as like the highest pushed wrestler, even though he's a reliable, secondary champion. I almost see him like a modern day Bret Hart, or a modern day somebody that they can use reliably as a guy that can have good matches and main event type matches for the WWE title, but never the number one superstar. He was never like the number one face of the company. It was always somebody like a Cena, or a Brock Lesnar, or a Roman Reigns. AJ was almost he's secondary, and so I think that holds him back. Even though he's a long rating guy, it's a little bit more complicated with WWE because they have two separate champions. You got the Universal title, which is on Raw, which is the number one show that gets the highest ratings, and then SmackDown is the secondary show. The B show that's not as important as Raw. So by default, AJ is not as important as the Raw champion, unfortunately. I think that, Brock Lesnar is higher above him on the pecking order. And I don't even think he's closed WrestleMania. He's never main evented WrestleMania as the last match defending the WWE title. So it's like, he just never felt that important. I don't think Vince McMahon sees him as a big draw. I think Vince McMahon sees him as a reliable, kind of a good-looking guy that's like reliable, that's like a high-flying, good work rate, good ability in the ring, and he can deliver good matches, but he's not the top guy. He's not like 6'3". He doesn't have the size. He doesn't have the muscular look that he's looking for, and he doesn't have the youth. So there's a lot of things going against AJ Styles, even though he became champion for very long. Same with Daniel Bryan, even though he became, again, champion in 2014, I never felt like Vince McMahon fully bought into the Daniel Bryan hype. He just happened to be slotted in there because, CM Punk left and all that, and things had to change. So I think the number one star, at least when it came to the WWE title, is, well, actually, let's go to the Universal title holder first, before we even get to the the number one guy of WWE of the 2010s. So Finn Balor became the first ever Universal Champion, but very briefly, only 1 day champion. He got injured. Kevin Owens becomes 188-day champion. Goldberg becomes champion for about a month, loses the belt to Brock Lesnar at Mania 33. Lesnar dominates for 504 days as the Universal Champion. Roman Reigns finally overcomes Lesnar at August 2018 SummerSlam, only becomes champ for about 64 days, and then goes back to Lesnar for 122 plus days, and he's probably going to end up losing the title to Seth Rollins at WrestleMania this year. It wouldn't surprise me. But overall, there's only been, 5 champions since the Universal title was introduced, and Lesnar is easily the longest reigning with over 626 days as the world champion as of March 2019. Incredible reign by Lesnar. So obviously Lesnar's the most dominant Universal Champion. And he's also one of the more convincing WWE champions. So, man, I think Lesnar would be number one just by numbers alone. But Roman is booked as the number one babyface. And again, this is the dynamic of WWE. It's so weirdly divided between people. This is part of the reason why they don't have any huge stars anymore that could be the company could be built around. It's like they don't have that single Austin, Rock, Hulk Hogan type of guy anymore. Bruno Sammartino. They don't have that single star that's like dominant. The closest would be Brock Lesnar, but he's like a part-timer. And then you have somebody like Roman Reigns who doesn't have long reigns, but he is considered the top guy because he's always promoted as, on posters and everywhere that they go, he's like the main event guy, main eventing WrestleMania all the time. And then you have somebody like AJ who is the longest reigning WWE champion of the 2010s, but like he's on a secondary show like SmackDown. And then somebody like CM Punk never really lasted after 2014. He was gone by after I think a Royal Rumble 2014, and he never even showed up. I don't think he showed up at Raw on screen. So let's see. I'm trying to think. The number one superstar of WWE in the 2010s. This one is so. It's so divided. It's so lackluster because they don't have that Austin figure anymore. They don't even have a Rock anymore. That super charismatic single superstar that everybody likes, that everybody buys their merchandise. The closest in that sense would be the CM Punk, but Punk never lasted that long, and then boom, here comes Lesnar to dominate the Universal picture. Roman becomes pushed as the main eventer of WrestleMania and all that. And then AJ comes in as this reliable workhorse. So it's strangely divided. If I had to choose just one guy, I'd have to pick Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar has, just like with Bobby Lashley, he's got the, UFC, MMA credibility. You know what I'm saying? I mean, Bobby Lashley was never in UFC, but he was, a solid MMA fighter. I mean, he has a good record. Same with, Brock Lesnar. Roman Reigns is definitely a top guy in terms of booking wise and being a top face, but he never dominated as champion, and so many people boo him that it's like, ugh, whatever. And then you have somebody like CM Punk, who is very kind of close to becoming a unifying champion, similar to like a Rock and Austin back in their time when he was in his peak in like 2011, and maybe even 2012. But like CM Punk, he was gone by 2014, so it's like that legacy was cut off really quickly, or a little too soon. And then you have somebody like AJ, who is a good hand, a good reliable champion, but he was never the top guy. He was never on Raw as the top champion. He was mostly a SmackDown guy, kind of like Edge back in the day, or somebody like even like a Jeff Hardy or something like that. Vince McMahon, you can tell Vince doesn't fully buy into making AJ the number one centerpiece of the company. It's more like Roman Reigns or even like a Brock Lesnar. So the 2010s is weird, really weird year. A weird decade, I should say. And of course, we still have a few months left. I mean, who knows? I guess maybe Seth Rollins could become a really dominant Universal Champion. Maybe Kofi could break out and become really popular as WWE Champion later this year. So I don't know who's going to be the next WWE Champion, but the number one guy, if I had to pick one, is Brock Lesnar. Again, the size, the look. He's got the mouthpiece with Paul Heyman, who's great on the microphone, excellent addition to the act. And then you have his dominant reigns. He's a part-timer, so he feels special every time he comes out. Even though some people don't like the fact that he's only there for a few times during the year. It feels like a main event every time he comes in. Every time he's having a title match, every time he's having a main event match, he's competing against Goldberg. It feels like a big deal, like it's a heavyweight match. Like, man, this is cool. It's like a box office draw every time that Brock Lesnar comes out. So I gotta go with Brock. From box office draw, his look. He's just really convincing. And then maybe number two would probably be CM Punk, just because he was really popular in 2011, 2012, and he was over, and he sold a lot of merchandise, but he left so quickly, and he was popular for a little bit there. And then maybe number three would be Roman Reigns, and then number four would be AJ Styles, if I had to put it in order. So overall, I guess Brock Lesnar is the number one most dominant superstar of the 2010s. Like, he's the number one wrestler of the 2010s decade. As much as I maybe don't like him just being booked so very limited, and he's not there all the time, I think it's still cool to kind of have that special. Every now and then you'll see him, but not all the time, so he doesn't feel overexposed. I still like that. Back in the 80s it was kind of like that. Like Hogan wouldn't defend the title a lot during his time in the 80s. Those old wrestlers, they barely defended it. Guys like Bruno Sammartino. That's why they held on to the title for so long. And I think the same thing with Brock Lesnar. It's like he would defend it every now and then, once in a blue moon, once in a while, but they're very careful with him. They've protected him and only make him appear every now and then as as this dominant beast, king of Suplex City or mayor of Suplex City or whatever, So I gotta go with Brock Lesnar, even though he's up there in age, he's older, he's not gonna get any younger, and I think well into the 2020s he's gonna ultimately retire, and he's gonna hang it up. He's made so much money already, and I think he just does it for the money. He's all about cash and all that. He's all about getting that huge payday. He lives a life of relative he likes to hunt and all that stuff, and so he's spending a lot of money, but he's I think he's going to retire. I would expect him to retire sometime in the early 2020s probably. I can't imagine him continuing any further. So between TNA, ROH, and New Japan and WWE, I guess I'd have to pick Brock Lesnar as the most dominant guy. And then maybe number two would be, that's a little bit more tough, because then you have Lashley, Okada, and who did I pick for TNA? Oh no, TNA is Bobby Lashley. New Japan is Okada, and Ring of Honor is Jay Lethal. And it's a very different mixture. You get a wide variety of different personalities and different abilities. And Lashley is kind of like Lesnar light a little bit. As much as I like Lashley, he's not on the same level as Lesnar, even though I think that's a really good match. That's a dream match of mine. I would love to see Bobby Lashley against Brock Lesnar. That's an incredible, main event heavyweight match. That'd be so cool, but I don't know if we'll ever really see it. And then you have Okada, who's like the work rate guy, the technical, in-ring favorite guy. That's like, the Smart Mark favorite, I should say. Like the Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer kind of favorite. Like the indie nerd kind of fan base that likes New Japan and the 50-minute matches and all that. And then you have somebody like Jay Lethal, who's just a reliable, good in the mic, good in the ring. He's got a great theme song. He's got the total package basically. Aside from he's not the biggest guy. He's not like 6'5". He's not like a super heavyweight, but he's not the smallest guy either. He's kind of a medium-sized guy, but he's got a lot of talent, a lot of performing ability. He's almost like another version of like a CM Punk, or another version of somebody like a more well-rounded Daniel Bryan. A more well-rounded Seth Rollins or something like that. One of those really reliable type guys. Or even like an AJ Styles, a more charismatic AJ Styles, I think. So the number one superstar or number one wrestler of the 2010s of the decade, the 2010s decade, I'd have to go with, just by the way that he's booked as a complete powerhouse, dominant guy, gotta go with Brock Lesnar. He's just convincing. He's got the look. He's got the mouthpiece. He's got the box office ability. He'd have to be number one. Now, my personal favorite is a different story. It'd probably be somebody more like like an Austin Aries. I love Austin Aries' work. He did really good in the 2010s. I thought he was a really, on the microphone, he cuts good promos. He's had some good matches, but he's a really small guy. I wouldn't say that he's a huge draw in wrestling. He's more like an indie kind of guy, like a journeyman indie star that can win championships all over the different indie companies, but he was never like a crossover mainstream star. So unfortunately, as much as I love Austin Aries' work, he's my favorite out of the decade probably as a male star, and then maybe as a female performer, it'd be somebody like Rosemary. So Rosemary and Austin Aries are my two favorite like overall performers of the 2010s. Brock Lesnar would be the overall most dominant, number one booked, most dominant wrestler of the 2010s decade. So that's it for this episode of the Review Space. Thank you guys for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Check out the rest of the channel for more wrestling-related topics and podcasts. Click on the bell button for the latest notifications. And until next time, peace.